There was a time when the world begged to see him. Now he begged not to be seen. Behind thick velvet curtains in a house filled with echoes and gold records, Elvis sat in silence. Not the silence of peace, the silence of vanishing. He hadn't opened a window in days. The air inside had grown still, like a museum room sealed off from time. The kind of stillness that made clocks louder and memories heavier. And Elvis was disappearing into it, not physically, spiritually. The man who once commanded crowds with a single curled lip now struggled to look at his own reflection. He moved slower now, heavier, his white robe dragged behind him like a cape that had forgotten its hero. Upstairs, no one entered without permission, but no permission was ever granted. He stood in front of the mirror, the gold-framed kind that used to flatter him. Today, it betrayed him. His eyes searched the glass for the boy from Tupelo, the hungry kid with the shaky hands who walked into Sun Records with nothing but a dream and a voice. That boy was gone, and in his place stood a man crowned too early and left behind by the throne. He reached for the Bible on his nightstand. It wasn't habit. It was desperation. He opened to a random page, hoping for a message, a sign, anything to break the silence that filled the walls like smoke. But the words didn't leap out. They whispered back, "The Lord is near to the brokenhearted." He closed the book. Too late. A half-eaten sandwich sat on a tray near the door. No appetite, no hunger, just habits, a routine of survival disguised as living. The staff downstairs had learned not to knock. They tiptoed, whispered, waited. He had become more myth than man, even to the people under his roof. But myths don't bleed, and Elvis did, quietly, internally. With every passing hour that felt like a lifetime no one could remember, he shuffled to the corner armchair, the one facing closed window, sat down, stared. Outside, the world still played his records. Inside, he couldn't remember the last time he sang. Not on stage, not in rehearsal. Alone, he hadn't touched the piano, hadn't hummed a melody, because the moment he did, he'd have to answer the question he feared most. What if the music isn't there anymore? And so he remained still, not resting, not sleeping, just paused. A man who once shook the world, now afraid to move in his own house. And in that moment, behind drawn curtains, a gold-plated door, and a name the world would never forget, Elvis prayed, not with words, but with silence. The day the music hit, the quiet wasn't new, but that morning, even the walls seemed to hold their breath. Elvis had stopped wearing his rings. One by one, they had found their way into a drawer, as if their weight had grown too heavy for fingers that no longer pointed toward any future. He walked barefoot across the bedroom floor. The carpet, once plush and indulgent, now felt foreign, too soft for a man who felt so raw. The robe around his shoulders hung loose, like a curtain draped over something unfinished. He stood still for a moment, listening, not for music, not for voices, but for himself. There was nothing, no melody humming beneath the surface, no rhythm tapping on the walls of his chest, no divine whisper calling him back to the piano keys. The music had hidden, and Elvis didn't know if it would return. The hallway outside was dim, lit only by a small lamp he never turned off. He passed the gold records on the wall, plaques that once defined him, now just reminders of a version of himself he couldn't recognize. Each frame felt colder than the last. They didn't cheer anymore. They judged. He made his way downstairs slowly, each step in negotiation with gravity. The staircase, once a grand entrance for dramatic returns and impromptu serenades, now creaked beneath a quieter man. No one saw him. They never did, not this early. Not anymore. He entered the room that held the piano. It was untouched, immaculate, a black and white monument to something sacred. He stood before like a priest before an altar, and then he sat. His fingers hovered over the keys, trembled slightly. He didn't press a single note, because he wasn't sure if it would sound right. Worse, he wasn't sure if he could survive it if it did. He closed the lid gently, as if tucking it in for a long sleep. Then he looked around the room. Photographs, family, fans, presidents. A lifetime of smiles framed in perfect posture and perfectly groomed hair. But behind every smile, Elvis now saw a question. Were you ever truly happy? And the truth? He didn't know. He returned upstairs as silently as he came. In the bathroom, the mirror met him again. It had become his most honest companion. The man staring back was familiar, but not whole. His hair was styled. His eyes were not. He leaned in closer, searched them, not for youth, not for fame, but for faith. Faith that he was still in there somewhere, back in the bedroom. He sat on the edge of the bed. He didn't lie down, just sat. There was a notepad on the nightstand, blank. He picked up the pen, tapped it, twirled it, then finally wrote, "If they remember the crown, but not the heart, did I ever truly live?" He stared at it, then underlined the word heart. Twice. That evening, Ginger knocked once. Soft, hopeful, no answer. Not because he didn't hear, but because he didn't have the strength to explain the silence. She waited a few seconds longer than usual, then walked away. He heard every step, and in that loneliness, Elvis realized something. He had become what he feared the most, an echo. The curtains were still closed, and the music still hiding. Echoes of a boy from Tupelo. The hardest part wasn't being alone. It was being alone with memories that didn't ask permission to return. That morning, Elvis didn't rise from bed with purpose. He simply rose because the silence pressed too heavily on his chest. The robe hung over the chair like it had been waiting for him. The same robe, the same room, the same shadow stretched across the wall as the day before. But today, something felt different. Not better, just more real. He walked to the window and placed a hand on the curtain. His fingers didn't move it, but they hovered, like a man standing on the edge of something he once knew. He thought about light, not the kind from chandeliers or camera flashes, but the kind that used to wake him on warm Mississippi mornings, back when breakfast was simple and music was a dream no one believed in but him. Tupelo. He hadn't spoken the name aloud in years, not because he forgot, but because remembering hurt. There was a photograph in his dresser drawer, creased, faded, and folded 4 times over. He had tucked it away beneath stage jewelry and prescription slips, hoping it wouldn't find him again. But that morning, it did. He pulled the drawer open slowly, like disturbing something sacred. There it was. Him, age 11, barefoot in front of a small wooden house. His mama behind him, his hair wild from the wind, eyes squinting from sun. No rhinestones, no silk, just skin and dust and dreams. He stared at the boy, and the boy stared back. In the kitchen downstairs, a teapot whistled faintly. No one turned it off. The help had learned his rhythms. They stayed distant, polite, invisible. He preferred it that way, but that didn't make it easier. He returned to his room and sat cross-legged on the carpet, like he used to when writing songs on motel floors in the early days. He ran his fingers along the edge of the notebook beside him. Open pages, blank pages. He wasn't sure which were harder to look at. The open ones knew too much. The blank ones expected too much. Still, he began to write. Sometimes the king just wants to be a man, but the world only sees a crown. He stopped, put the pen down, and laughed, soft, sad, almost like a hiccup from the soul. That night, he made his way back to the music room. The piano waited. It always waited. But this time, he didn't sit. He stood beside it, closed his eyes, and began to hum. No lyrics, just a vibration, a thread of something familiar, the closest thing to prayer his voice had known in years. And in that fragile melody, Elvis felt the boy from Tupelo stir inside him. Not fully, not enough to stay, but enough to remind him he was still there. Then the sound stopped, just like that, gone. And for a long moment, He didn't move, didn't breathe, because he was afraid that he had only imagined it. The man in the mirror doesn't clap. The crowd was gone, but the stage still lived inside him. That was the strange thing about memory. It didn't ask if you were ready. It didn't wait for applause. It simply turned on the lights, pulled back the curtain, and shoved you out there, barefoot and breathless, to face a world that had already decided who you were. Elvis stood in front of the mirror, not to fix his hair, not to check his clothes, but to find out if he was still real, because lately he wasn't sure. He leaned in closer. The man in the mirror stared back, still wearing the famous face, but without the famous fire. The eyes were hollow, not in a haunted way, but in the way a theater feels after everyone's gone home. He raised his hand slowly and waved at his own reflection. No reaction, no crowd, no thunder, just silence. And silence, Elvis had learned, was the hardest sound in the world. The day passed slowly, the way it always did now. He wandered from room to room, not with purpose, but with the desperate rhythm of man trying to remember why walls were built in the first place. Downstairs, a radio played faintly in the kitchen. Someone had forgotten to turn it off. The DJ's voice echoed up through the floorboards, announcing a new artist hit single, a new voice, a new star, a new crown. He turned it off, not out of jealousy, out of fatigue. There had been too many voices, too many kings, too many copies of the man who didn't know how to be himself anymore. That evening, he opened the box, the one he kept locked at the back of his closet. Inside were old telegrams, stage photos, newspaper clippings, letters from fans he would never meet. He pulled out one from 1956. A little boy had written, "Dear Elvis, when I grow up, I want to be just like you." He held the letter to his chest for a long time, then whispered, "When I grow old, I don't know who I'm supposed to be." He sat at the edge of the bed, knees aching slightly, fingers twitching from nerves or age, or both. The TV was on, but the volume was muted. He watched without listening. That felt safer. He didn't want more noise. He wanted presence. At 2:17 a.m., he walked barefoot into the music room. Again, the same piano, the same stillness. But this time he sat, let his fingers fall onto the keys. A C chord, then E minor, then nothing. He couldn't remember the lyrics, not because they were gone, but because his mind was full of questions with no melody to carry them. He placed his hand flat against the piano lid and closed his eyes, and he imagined the sound of a crowd, distant but warm, not the screaming kind, not the vaguest kind, the kind that really listened. He imagined them waiting for him to sing something true, but instead, he whispered into the night, "I'm still here, just not sure where." He stayed there for hours, until dawn began to peek through the curtains. He still wouldn't open. He didn't sleep, didn't cry, didn't move, just breathed. And sometimes that was the hardest thing, because the world remembered the man who moved like fire. But no one ever asked what happened after the music stopped. No one claps for the last rehearsal. It was 3:42 a.m. when Elvis forgot the sound of applause. He had been lying awake for hours, body still, but mind pacing. There was no crowd, no stage, no spotlight, just a ceiling fan spinning above him, slow and steady, like a lazy metronome marking the silence. He blinked toward the ceiling and tried to summon it, the sound that once made his bones hum, his soul burn. The rush of thousands rising to their feet, screaming his name, crying just to see him move. But nothing came, just the fan, just the dark, just the slow realization that maybe he was clapping for himself now. He sat up. The sheets slid from his shoulders like stage curtains falling at the end of a forgotten play. He walked across the room and opened the wardrobe. Inside, glittering jumpsuits, gold buckles, silk scarves still carrying the scent of old perfume and bright lights. They didn't shimmer the way they used to. They looked like museum pieces now. artifact from a man who still breathed but no longer burned. He reached out and touched one. The fabric was cool, the weight surprising. He used to move like water in these. Now it felt like armor without a war. He left the room without a sound. Down the hallway, past a mirror that no longer flattered, into the quiet room where the reel-to-reel tape machine sat. It hadn't been used in weeks, maybe months. He turned it on. The software was the loudest thing he'd heard all day. He set up a microphone, sat down, looked at it, then at himself, then at the mic again, and said nothing. Because what do you say when the world has heard every note except the ones that matter? He stayed like that for a long time, breathing, remembering, not hits, not headlines, but back roads, gospel choirs, his mama's lullabies, the little boy who clutched a guitar like it was a secret, the teen who sang into a hairbrush, praying that someday someone would listen. And now everyone had. Too many. And yet, somehow, it had never been enough. He pressed record. And for the first time in what felt like years, he spoke. I don't know if this will be heard. I don't know if I want it to be. But if this is my last rehearsal, let be the one no one interrupts. His voice cracked at the end, not from age, but from honesty. He played one note on the piano, then another, then stopped. He leaned into Mike and whispered, not lyrics, not poetry, just a sentence he had never said out loud. I miss being loved for nothing. He paused the tape, walked to the window. The curtain remained closed. He stood there, forehead against the fabric, breathing in the weight of a world that never let him rest. Outside, the trees swayed. Somewhere, someone was playing his music. Somewhere, someone still believed he was immortal. But in that moment, Elvis didn't want to be remembered. He wanted to be held. He returned to the microphone, pressed record again. And this time, he sang. Not a song anyone would know. Not a melody made for crowds. A quiet hymn. One line, over and over. Take me where the noise can't follow. He let it hang in the air, raw, unpolished. And then he turned the machine off. Not because he was done, but because that was enough. In the silence that followed, he sat there, not as a star, not as a legend, but as a man. And in that silence, he heard it, faint, from somewhere deep within. A slow, steady rhythm. Not drums, not a crowd. His own heart, still beating, still here. The room with no applause. He used to fill stadiums. Now he filled ashtrays. 3 of them sat beside the nightstand. Half full, overflowing, forgotten. Like him, Elvis hadn't slept, but he also hadn't moved much. His body obeyed the rhythm of exhaustion, not rest. His mind, however, had become its own concert, one he never agreed to headline. He stood in the hallway, barefoot, robe dragging against the wooden floor, staring at the door to the one room he hadn't entered in years, the prayer room. That's what his mama had called it, back when faith was stitched into Sunday suits and biscuits were sacred, back when hope was something you knelt for. He touched the doorknob. Cold, he turned it. It didn't creak. It didn't protest. It simply opened, as if it, too, had been waiting. Inside, dust, stillness, the smell of old books and unopened letters. A small cross above the mantel. No spotlight, no camera, no band. Just the ghost of everything he once believed in. He sat down in the wooden chair. It didn't fit him anymore. But then again, neither did the life he was still wearing. He looked at the walls. There were photographs, not the flashy kind, not gold records or magazine covers. These were family photos, church photos. Lisa Marie, small and smiling, covered in birthday cake. His mama, holding him like he was the answer to a question she'd whispered into the night. He blinked. His eyes didn't water. They trembled. He pulled a Bible from the shelf. It opened to a page he hadn't marked. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. He read it aloud. His voice cracked. He read it again. This time it broke. And for the first time in years, Elvis Presley wept. Not for fame, not for the crown, but for the boy who hadn't asked for any of it. He whispered into the room like it could hear. I just wanted to sing. He sat in that room for hours. At times, he prayed. At times, he spoke to his mama. At times, he said nothing, because sometimes silence is the only honest prayer. By late morning, he stood. His knees popped. He smiled at that. A human sound. A reminder. He walked back down the hall and opened another door. Lisa Marie's room. Frozen in time. He stepped in slowly. His fingers ran along her bookshelf. Her toy piano. The drawing she'd made of the two of them on a stage together. Her in a dress, him with a crown, and a guitar bigger than he was. He took it off the wall and held it. Whispered, "You drew me the way I want to be remembered." In the afternoon, he returned to the music room. This time, he sat at the piano. No lights, no notes. He just sat, and then he played, not to perform, not to rehearse, to remember. He sang softly, an old gospel, one he'd sung in Tupelo with nothing but dirt under his feet and sky above his head. And as his voice filled the room, something shifted. It wasn't the world. It wasn't his pain. It was him. For a brief, flickering moment, he was not Elvis Presley, the king. He was just Elvis, a boy, a man, a voice. And when the last note faded, he didn't bow. He didn't stand. He just placed his hand on the piano lid and said, "That one wasn't for them. That one was for me." As evening settled, he lit a candle in the prayer room. It flickered. He watched it for an hour, maybe more, then stood, left it burning, closed the door, and whispered to the flame, "If I don't wake up tomorrow, that's okay." The sound only angels hear. It wasn't a dream, but it didn't feel like waking either. Elvis stood in the center of the room, hands at his sides, breath shallow, as if even oxygen needed permission now. Around him, the furniture sat still, undisturbed, silent witnesses to a life folding inward. He wasn't sure how long he had been standing there. Minutes? Hours? Maybe days. Because time had stopped keeping score the moment the music did. He walked barefoot to the window. The curtain still hung. He reached for it again, fingers trembling, not from age, but from meaning. And for the first time in years, he opened it. Light spilled into the room like a memory too strong to resist. It didn't burn. It didn't blind. It just filled, the way voices once filled auditoriums, the way gospel once filled wooden churches, the way his mother's lullabies once filled nights that had no clocks. He stood in that light for a long time, not moving, not crying, just existing. For the first time in what felt like forever, he returned to the piano. This time, not as an artist, not as a legend, just as a man who had nothing to prove, a man who had everything to say. He lifted the lid, touched the keys like they were holy, and began to play, not a song, but a sound, a tone, a hum. And as the chords flowed, so did the past. He saw himself at age 10, standing in front of a small congregation in Mississippi, eyes wide, knees knocking, voice fragile. But when he sang, the room disappeared, and only the note remained. His mama had cried that day, not because of how it sounded, but because of how true it was. He saw her again now, sitting in a rocking chair on a front porch that no longer existed, her hands folded, her smile gentle, her eyes saying everything words never could. He whispered into the empty room, "Mama, I forgot how to sing to God." The music stopped. He laid his hands in his lap and sat there for a long, aching silence. Then the phone rang. It startled him, not because of the sound, but because it still rang. He picked it up slowly, didn't say hello, just breathed. On the other end, a voice, "You okay, Mr. Presley?" It was one of the guards. He hadn't called him by his first name in years. "You haven't come down in a while." Elvis didn't answer at first. Then, "I've been remembering." Pause. "That's good, sir." "No," Elvis said. "It's necessary." He hung up, returned to the chair. Not the one at the piano, the one in the prayer room. The candle was still burning, the Bible still open, but something had changed. He felt it, like the pause before a final verse, like the hush before the curtain falls, like the sound. Only angels hear. He sat with the flame and watched it dance. He closed his eyes, and in that moment, he wasn't in the house anymore. He was in Tupelo. He was 11. He was barefoot, and he was singing to the stars. A voice inside him rose, not loud, not perfect, but pure, not for charts, not for critics, just for peace, just for home. And he whispered, "I think I'm ready now." The candle flickered once, then steadied. Elvis leaned back, exhaled, and let the music go, not because he had lost it, but because it had finally come home. The man who sang his way home. When the lights finally went out, he was the only one left clapping. It was sometime after midnight when Elvis knew, not believed, not feared, but knew that this night was different. He sat in the old armchair by the window, the curtains still open from the day before. The moonlight spilled across the wooden floor like a silent spotlight, catching pieces of dust that danced like fading applause. The air smelled of stillness, of things left unsaid, of songs unrecorded, of people never kissed goodbye. He was tired, not of living, but of remembering. Every room had become a memory, every mirror a ghost, every silence a song he'd never sing again. He walked slowly through the house, barefoot, robe dragging behind him like the train of a final costume. He passed the music room, paused, but didn't go in. Not tonight. He didn't need the piano anymore, because tonight he had decided to sing without it. He returned to the prayer room. The candle was still lit. He hadn't blown it out since he lit it. He didn't need to. It felt sacred, alive, like someone was still listening. He knelt beside the chair, not with elegance, not with grace, just knees to the floor, hands to the sky, face to the flickering flame. And he whispered, "I've been so many people, I don't remember who you made me to be." Then silence, not empty, full, thick with memory. He remembered Tupelo. He remembered walking to school barefoot, humming church songs, voice cracking, soul unformed, but already burning. He remembered the first time he heard his voice on the radio. He remembered how his mama screamed and cried and held him like he was both son and miracle. He remembered Vegas, the lights, the lies, the loneliness, the backstage shakes, the hollow crowds. He remembered the girls, the parties, the pills, the friends who became shadows. And he remembered Lisa Marie, her laugh, her questions, the drawing she gave him once that said, "You're my biggest song, Daddy." He had folded it, put it in a drawer. Tonight, he took it out and cried over for the first time. Then, still on the floor, still in the candle's glow, he began to hum. One note, then two. It wasn't a melody. It was a memory. He wasn't singing to be heard. He was singing to be understood. And in that moment, something lifted, not around him. Within, his breath slowed, his hands softened, his mind quieted. For the first time in decades, he wasn't thinking of who he had to be. He was himself, just Elvis, a boy, a man, a voice. He stood up and walked slowly to the mirror in the hallway. It didn't scare him anymore. He looked into it and smiled, not because he liked what he saw, but because he forgave it. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He sang a full song, one of the old ones. No microphone, no reverb, just a man in the hallway at the end of something huge, and his voice cracked and wobbled and broke in places. But it soared too. It soared. And for the first time in a very long time, he felt like he was flying. Later, he lay in bed. The Bible was on the nightstand. The candle flickered gently down the hall. The letter from Lisa was folded beside his chest. And the room was still, so beautifully still, He closed his eyes and thought of his mama, of that church in Tupelo, of the first time he ever sang in front of people. He had been so scared, so unsure, so small. But after that first note, he was never afraid again, until the fame, until the costumes, until the silence. But tonight, he wasn't afraid. Not of the dark, not of tomorrow, not of being forgotten, because he had already done the hardest thing. He had remembered himself. He took one last breath and whispered, softly, like a child kneeling beside a bed, "Take me where the noise can't follow." And in that moment, the house held its breath. The world turned a page. The candle burned one last inch. And the man who shook the earth with his hips went home in silence,